Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This year, what struck me about this parsha is the archetypes in it. So the sick person is an archetype of vulnerability, and the priest is an archetype of authority and power. And I'd like to do a close reading of the Hebrew to understand how those two archetypes interplay. If you'd like to follow along, I'm on page 653. The first thing that I noticed, in the English it says, "The priest shall examine the affection on the skin of his body. If hair in the affected patch has turned white, and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous affection. When the priest sees it, he shall pronounce him impure." But I don't think that's actually the best translation of the Hebrew into English, although it does make a smooth English translation. If you look in the Hebrew, it says, "Hakohen v'timei oto." There's no word for the priest shall pronounce him or declare him impure. What it actually says is the priest impurifies him. In other words, it's not the illness that makes the vulnerable person impure. It's the person in authority saying, "You're impure." That puts a lot of power in the priest's hands. Rashi says that the priest actually has to tell the sick person, "You're impure." Like the guy with oozing skin didn't know that he was ill. This isn't about information or diagnosis. This is about someone in power giving a status of rejection to someone who is vulnerable. Chizkuni says he makes him impure through speech, that it's not enough for the priest to indicate with gesture that he is impure. He actually has to speak the words into being, much as the Creator spoke the world into being. The words themselves have power to create a status of impurity. Then if we look at line 4, "But if it is a white discoloration on the skin of his body, which does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the affected person for 7 days." In the Hebrew, it uses a word for isolate that I think has more nuance. V'hiskir hakohen et hanega. So contained in that is the root samach gimel resh, to close in. And if you look that word up in the dictionary, it means to shut up or even put into prison. So this is a forced action. This isn't something that the vulnerable, ill person would choose to do for him or herself. The priest is forcing upon him a quarantine. Then if we look at verse 5, "On the 7th day the priest shall examine him, and if the affection has remained unchanged in color," but that's not what the Hebrew says. It says, "V'hine hanega amad be'enav lo fasa hanega ba'or." So amad be'enav, if it still remains in his eyes, meaning, at least according to me, in the eyes of the priest, that means that illness is completely subjective to the person in power. What it tells us here, according to Ibn Ezra, is that the infected person is dependent on the judgment of the same priest. The same priest has to go and examine the sick person who saw him 7 days ago. That means that a new priest can't come in and be more objective. It has to be the one who made the ill person impure in the first place. And Rambam says that the priest can make this judgment, it has to be made with his eyes, right? If it says amad ba'anav, the judgment is made in the priest's eyes. It's not actually measured in some quantitative way. It's all qualitative according to the priest's opinion. So what exactly happens to this leper? How does he experience his illness if he is truly ill and not recovering? If we look on page 657, verses 45 and 46 near the bottom. As for the person with a leprous affection, his clothes shall be rent, his head shall be left bare, and he shall cover over his upper lip, and he shall call out, impure, impure. Can you imagine how humiliating that must be? It's like he's finally imbibed what the priest is telling him. He shall be impure as long as the disease is on him. Being impure, he shall dwell apart. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. So, the most vulnerable person in our society is now told, you can't dwell among us where there is support for you. And I think this is a great text because it can be overlaid in so many occasions. It could be a conversation about who do we make our priests and who do we make our lepers with governance. It could be a conversation about who do we allow to be our priests and who do we allow to be our lepers in our communities, our friendships, even our own families. Now, the question of who gets to be the priest is, who appoints the priest in the Torah? God, right? You're born a priest. God has said that the Levite family, they'll be the priests. That's an authority that we should trust, right? God is infallible, God is holy, God is perfect. So the question for us to take from this parsha is, as fallible human beings, who have we made our priests in our government, our communities, and our families? And do we think that they're worthy of the office? And who have we made our lepers? And do we think that they're worthy of isolation and being sent away? Shabbat Shalom.